Good evening, everybody. Very warm welcome to you all. Welcome on behalf of Wits University and in particular Wits Sport and Health, WiSH, to another one of our Wednesday webinars, WiSH Wednesdays. Again, at the start, a very big thank you to our sponsors, Sino and Lita Pharmaceutical Company. Really probably the best partners you could want. A great no-fuss sponsor. They really help us in the background a lot. So to Romy Osborne and your team, thank you very much for the support of these WiSH webinars this year. As you know, they've been very well attended, and particularly today we've been oversubscribed, and hence we are broadcasting live on YouTube as well. So if you go to YouTube, WiSH, Wits Sport and Health, you'll be able to follow us as well. Thank you in the background to Dr. Robin Saggers, who's had to do more work than usual on this one, distributing the information and helping to set up the technical aspects in the background and the YouTube link. And in particular today, something special, we've got some prizes to give away. So thank you very much to ASICS to supporting WiSH and sticking to the theme of running shoes by donating 3 very top of the range pairs of running shoes. And for those of you who are attending, you have a chance to win these running shoes if you are resident in South Africa. And to do that, you have to submit a question, and our very distinguished panel will choose 3 of the best questions as our winners. So stay attentive, ask good questions, and you are in the running literally for a top pair of ASICS running shoes. So thank you very much to ASICS for supporting this WiSH webinar as well. Make use of the question and answer facility on the Zoom channel. Submit your questions and we'll try and package them for our panel this evening to help answer. And those will be questions related to running and running shoes. And to help us answer these, we've got a very distinguished panel. Our guest speaker, Dennis Rehbock, is going to be introduced soon by Belinda Waghorn. Belinda herself is a Comrades Gold Medal winner, and we're very lucky in her position as a physiotherapist in Johannesburg to have her chairing our WiSH running interest group, which she does very well. It is one of the more active groups, and if you're a member of that WhatsApp group, you'll know what I mean, because once the messages start, they don't tend to stop through a day. So Belinda does a very good job of marshalling that. And helping her is Lauren Brown, a distinguished podiatrist at Waterfall Sports Orthopedic Surgery. Lauren really has a very distinct interest in running and running shoes and gait, and she's going to help us in answering your questions as well. So I welcome you. Please, those of you who are applying for CPD points, make sure you enter all of the correct details at the end of this webinar when the link comes up, and you'll receive your certificate in the next week or so. So I'm going to take my face off the screen, mute my Zoom, and invite Belinda to introduce the guest speaker for this evening, Dennis Rehbock. Over to you, Belinda.
Thanks for that introduction, John, and welcome to everyone on another WiSH webinar. So I think we can all agree that running is currently the fastest growing sport worldwide. You know, with the advent of park runs popping up all over and increased trail runs being held, and then together with a record number of entries that are recorded at road races every year. Probably the only exception is this year, but even with this being the case, since, you know, in most countries, people were actually allowed to leave their homes only to exercise under COVID-19. So I think, you know, many people that were non-runners before have maybe converted to the sport of running during this time. So this has created a very big market for shoe manufacturers. So although the running shoe tech increases every year, the durability of these shoes, in my opinion, decreases. So it forces runners to have to replace these way sooner than before. So as a runner, when I first started running many, many years ago, one of the first things I did was to take myself and my shoes off to a podiatrist. And I wasn't a physio at the time. And this was just to make sure that these were the right fit for me. And luckily they were. And I've actually continued to run in the same brand of shoe throughout. That being said, up to 5 years ago, I could walk into a shop, buy my shoes, put them on the next day, run a 50K and have no problems. Today, I cannot stay the same, and I almost don't even recognize my beloved running shoes. Then on the flip side, as a physiotherapist who treats many runners, the one question I get asked the most, and the one I dread the most, is, you guessed it, which is the best running shoe? 10 years ago, that wasn't a complicated question to answer, but after the talk this evening, you will understand the magnitude of that question and how impossible it actually is to answer. So, with further ado, I'm honored to introduce our speaker for this evening, Mr. Dennis Rehbock, who is firstly a dinosaur of the industry, having been part of the first group to ever qualify in podiatry in South Africa in 1980. And secondly, he is actually the running shoe whisperer, as you will find it very difficult to find anyone with more knowledge about running shoes than Dennis. Dennis has a diploma in podiatry as well as a Bachelor of Science degree and honours in podiatric studies. He practices sports as well as general podiatry and has also been involved in shaping the podiatrist of the future by lecturing for 38 years. In 2017 and 2018, he was invited to present at the World Congress of Podiatric Medicine in Naples, Italy, with one of these presentations being on technical running shoes. Dennis has been involved in running for longer than what I've been on this earth, and has run Comrades, 2 Oceans, New York City Marathon, Singapore Marathon, and most local races in South Africa. He currently still runs, but shorter distances, just to make sure I think his donut addiction does not get the better of him. With that, over to you, Dennis. Dennis?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get hold of my, there we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, family all around the world that are joining us today to listen to me talk about my usual subject, that is running shoes. But I think I need to start by explaining my background first, and the background on my picture, my virtual background. I was going to use Hout Bay, which is just to my right over here, as a background, but it is so cold, rainy, and unpleasant out there that I had to actually put a virtual one in. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to see what's going on down there. And now it's stuck. Oh, dear.
Dennis, if you just click on the screen and down at the bottom left, you should be able to advance your slides.
Good. Thank you, Robin. Thank you very much. That's why he's here, the technical expert. But let's talk a little bit about running shoes. Well, actually a lot about running shoes. And I've got a lot planned for a very short time. But I'd just like to start by thanking John Patricius for the kind invitation, Belinda Waghorn from the Running Interest Group of WiSH, Lauren Brown, my co-host and my good colleague, Dr. Robin Saggers, for his technical advice, and Alan Smith from ASICS for those wonderful prizes that we'll talk about later. And unfortunately, you've got to be on the whole time to get your questions in, and you have to be from South Africa, as John has said. But it's wonderful to be here and talk to this wide diversity of people and groups out there. I found some interesting shoes for the lockdown. There's the social distancing shoe on the left there, and the ALPHAFLY Stay Home edition of a racing shoe on the right there, which looks like grandpa's slippers. So just to start the day off with that. Now, just the usual disclaimers. In order to avoid any appearance of commercial influence or conflict of interest, I am not an ambassador or consultant to any running shoe company in South Africa. I do get seeded product though to test from time to time, even though I'm not a fast runner like Belinda is and people like that, but I do get seeded product to use and maybe comment on and try it out and see how it feels. My opinions expressed here this evening are solely my own. I will not be commenting on the efficacy of the different technologies I'm going to talk about and the different running shoes and brands. I'm just going to talk about it more from a clinical point of view. It's a clinical presentation, not a scientific presentation as such. The plan is quite large. John gave me 1 or 2 titles, so I'll just add in another 10 or 15 titles into what I'm going to talk about. A bit about shoe information in South Africa, shoe anatomy, very important. And then the more newer stuff, the shoe geometry. A little on minimalist, not a lot, a little on minimalist shoes, maximalist shoes, the stack heights, which are very important these days, the heel drops, which are important, the flubber midsole materials that we see in more and more of these days, carbon plates, which is the big talking point at the moment. And anybody who goes on social media knows all about carbon plates and all the racing shoes, the plates in them. I'm going to mention INEOS 159, which is very interesting, related to carbon plates and those type of racing shoes. I'm going to talk about the carbon plate race in terms of the other companies coming up with carbon plated shoes, and then shoe prescription, the old traditional way, and the sort of new ideas on prescription. I'm going to mention socks. I'm not going to talk a lot about socks. I'm going to mention them because I think it's important, but not a lot. And then we'll have the ASIC surprise draw at the end for those who put in some good questions. Okay, I just want to remind you, I do have a technical running shoe guide, and a lot of what I'm talking about and the information and the shoe brands and the shoe models will be in this guide on my website. And there's a full guide, a biomechanical guide, a brand guide. There's even a sock guide there if you want to look at socks and stuff like that. And I've just updated it, especially for this event. Updated it yesterday, actually. So a little bit of running shoe information about South African running shoes. Unfortunately, we're a small country. We haven't got tons and tons of runners like places like the States or in Europe. So we only have 22 shoe brands that bring in product running shoes or technical running shoes to our country. And that equates to 125 models. And yes, I've counted each one of them. Worldwide shoe brands is at the moment 141 brands of shoes or technical shoes or running shoes, but we only get 22 of them. And out of the models of shoes, we only get 7 shoes that are strong anti-pronation, 21 shoes that are mild supportive shoes, and 93 shoes that are neutral. And you'll see why that is important later, this breakdown of types of biomechanical shoes. Now, Belinda said, everybody asks, so what's the best shoe out there? And you know what? There's no best shoe out there. There's always a best shoe that works for you, and that's what's most important. If it works for you, it's the best shoe for you. But there's not one shoe that'll be the best for everybody out there. But the statistics we use are based on the Comrades Marathon shoe count, which I must confess is not a shoe count on finishes, it's a shoe count on entry. So when you enter the race, you put what shoe or brand and model you're going to run in, and that's what the shoe count is from. That doesn't mean that the runner will get to the race with that same shoe, but it's the closest statistical sort of breakdown of shoes we can get. And you can see out of nearly 25,000 runners, ASICS, and this is a long distance event, obviously, which is 87 to 92 kilometers. ASICS have close to 38% of the field, Nike second with 20, New Balance with 12 or nearly 13, then followed by the smaller guys like Adidas, Brooks, Saucony, and other meaning it could be any other shoe like a Bata, Taki or anything like that, followed by Rehbock, very little at the moment, but they're getting some good shoes coming through, Mizuno, Puma, and even high-tech. There's a few high-techs out there. What is not included in this are the newer shoes such as HOKA and 360 degrees and those type of shoes, because they don't appear on the form for people to fill in when they enter the race. So this is roughly what the long distance runners are wearing out there. This is not the short distance runners or the weekend runners or the jolly joggers or people like that. This is the long distance running statistics. So bear that in mind as we go through. It's very different to the rest of the world. Their shoe statistics are quite different to ours. So I also decided out of the shoe brands, we all know the shoe brands we've got and we'll talk a lot about them, but there are so many other shoes in the world of names of shoe brands you've never heard of. And you can just look at what's on your screen at the moment. There are names there. I bet you might have seen one or two if you're really lucky, but the rest you've actually not even heard of. So there's so many brands, but we're just not going to get them. We don't get them. Maybe you can get them online. Okay. So the anatomy of a running shoe. A running shoe is very simple. It has 4 working parts, and if you add laces, it's got 5 parts. Okay, and they're all very, very important. but it's good to know what it's all made from. Let's start underneath in what's called the outer sole. That's the part that lands on the ground and interfaces the shoe to the ground. And you can see there's different designs of outer sole with different types of rubber in them. There's carbon rubber, there's blown rubber, there's all kinds of newer designs. Bottom right, you can see there. And it's an interesting part of the shoe, but at this point in time, it's a sort of a pretty boring part of the shoe. So it's there for tread and traction, has flex grooves in it if there's more flexibility needed in a shoe. It gives you a bit of protection from rocks and dirt, and that's especially true in your trail shoes and shoes like that. Mostly it's carbon rubber, which is more durable, and that's the black rubber you normally see, Vibram rubber. And now the newer type of shoes have blown rubber, which is much lighter, it's more flexible, it's more cushioned, it adds to cushioning, but it's far less durable. Okay, there's some shoes that have strange outer sole devices, like something like the Newton running shoes that has actuator lugs underneath to enable you to run more on your forefoot as you're running faster and that type of thing. So there's not great amount of technology in there at this stage. It's relatively basic stuff. The midsole of the shoe is a far more functional and interesting part of the shoe, and you'll see later on when I talk all about FLUBBER. Oh, sorry, this is the slide is out of order. Okay. Oh, sorry, the midsole is the most important part of the running shoe. It has the main technology and all the modern technologies in the midsole. It supports you, it cushions you, it's got carbon fiber plates in it to make you run faster and all that type of thing. And the materials used in midsoles are EVA, ethylene vinyl acetate, or derivatives of it like Mogo, Kiva, Phylon, Phylite, and much, much more newer midsole materials. And that's where I've termed this section FLUBBER. That's the new materials for shock absorption, for that type of thing. So I'll talk a lot about FLUBBER as we go along. In the old days, we had polyurethane midsoles, but they're really too hard and heavy, and they literally go rotten after a while from moisture and that. Other midsole type technology is dual and tri-density midsole components, but that's also perhaps a little bit more old technology. You get lots and lots of other technology in the midsoles, and this is a list of the slightly more older technology, and I will pick it up when we talk about FLUBBER and the newer technology in a little bit later on. Okay, here's some more unusual midsole type configurations and materials. The bottom left, you can see a midsole with a medial wedge on the inside. Perhaps it's old technology, but it is still used in a lot of shoes. And there's shoes with dynamic support where they don't have wedges, but they do give a little bit of more stability to the shoe and the foot. So, you know, a lot of old slides here, but I'm going to leave it like that because we've got the newer slides coming up. Air, gel type components that we all remember from days gone by. Yes, we still get them, but we've got a lot of newer, more exciting materials here. Here's a picture of an exciting midsole material. It's very unusual, very radical, but that's what I call FLUBBER, and I've got a whole section for that. Now, the upper of the shoe is a part of the shoe that holds the shoe midsole, inner sole, outer sole onto the foot. Okay, very important. There is technology in it, but there's also the good looks in it. As you can see, that's where all the beautiful colors are and the pretty cosmetics and the lovely sort of designs are in the upper of the shoe. The upper is important, protects the foot, gives you comfort. In the old days, it was made of leather materials. Nowadays, it's more synthetic, nylons, leather, breathable meshes, reflective materials. So they are quite important as well. The heel counter, the back part around the back of the heel, which is part of the upper, does help a little bit for heel stability and support. The heel tab at the back, you can see in the middle picture there, there's a heel tab for cushioning around the heel and the bottom of the Achilles tendon. The upper also has the tongue, soft sponge material to protect the dorsum of the foot from lace pressure and stuff like that, and in front a toe box to accommodate the foot and toes. And what's nice these days is the toe boxes don't have big fat ridges of sewing inside them, which can irritate the toes and give you blister. The toe boxes are basically nice and smooth inside for comfort. And yeah, some of the materials you can get, the picture on the right at the top is the material that's all fused together. It's called hyperfuse. It's fused together, and a lot of companies have very similar uppers to this, so that there are no ridges or bumps inside to be uncomfortable. The bottom left one is a very old-fashioned leather upper shoe that, yeah, it's just old-fashioned, not used much anymore. But what's very important in the uppers is some brands have wider uppers and some have narrower uppers. And that's important for the size of feet. Some people have narrower feet, some people have wider feet, some people need a longer shoe, and this is where that technology of the sizing will come in. So generally the wider brands are your New Balance, Saucony, Brooks, Ultra, Innovate, Asics, where they are wider naturally, or they have active width fittings. In other words, for that big fat wide South African foot with bunions, a wider shoe is necessary. The narrower ones, you know, Asics, Nike, a little bit narrower, so doesn't fit everybody's foot as nice maybe as it should. And the in-betweeners, Asics can go both ways. They're in wider as well, because some of their shoes have got width fittings, and Adidas. So you can get shoes that will fit the size of feet better and be more comfortable for the patient. And at the bottom there's some of the width fittings you can get on my shoe guide. You can get men's in a D, which is sort of normal, a 2E wider, and a 4E very wide if necessary. And in the woman, you can get oscillating between a B and a D, a normal and a slightly narrower shoe, depends on the lady's foot. Okay, so it's very important. That's more of the upper configurations. There you can see some of the slightly wider shoes, and some on the right, the Ultra, very wide, nice for the typical South African foot. So that does help a lot. The inner sole is also an active part of the shoe, but it's more of a comfort part where it's made out of soft materials. You can see a whole variety of midsoles where there's cushioning, there's comfort. Some of them are built up with a little bit of support, and you get those over-the-counter orthotic types inner soles that you can put in, not the type that podiatrists make, but they're really for shock absorption, maybe a little control, and foamy, nice, comfortable materials. There's some of those OTC inner soles one can get to replace your inner with. In my opinion, it doesn't take the place of a well-made custom orthotic, but they are widely used out there for people if they need a little bit more cushioning or control of their feet or whatever. Podiatrists love to use these inner soles to look at the wear patterns to see where there's pressure areas, and it helps in terms of the gait analysis as well. And we love to put bits and bobs of pads and wedges on these inner soles as more supportive aspects, or controlling the foot or changing how it works slightly. So we love fiddling with those inner soles, what we call sock line adjustments. The laces are also important, not ultra important, but laces are important. You get different types of laces, round laces, flat laces, semi-round or elliptical laces, bubble laces for the triathletes. We don't really get Velcro much anymore, but there are different laces for different reasons and different ways of lacing those laces, and that could be a lecture all on its own, the different ways. And there you can see a picture bottom right of different lacing techniques for if you've got a wider foot or a narrower foot or anything like that. The interesting one is the BOA lacing system, the middle picture at the top. Some shoes have that lacing system where you dial it and it makes it tight, and you press a button and it loosens it. So laces are very interesting part of the shoe. Okay, now it's always thought running is a very simplistic thing, and all you need for running is very simple, your running shoes. You don't really need much else, and here's proof that you don't really need much else for when you go running. Okay, and this picture always brings me into one or two slides about this whole minimalistic running shoe thing that we've had for a little while, well, a couple of years back, and it's now very much a small section of the market. And I must say, it's probably big in places like Cape Town, where the guys love to run on the mountains and the trails and the beaches. But up in Joburg, you wouldn't be seen dead in a pair of this shoe at a race, because guys will laugh at you or mock you relentlessly. So this whole thing of minimalist running shoes, and you can see cross-country runners on grass, road runners, there's still a bit of it out there, okay? But it's a genre of running that's gone away. And if you look at trends on Google, which is not really scientific, but it just shows you that people are still looking at minimalist running, barefoot running type of thing. My opinion is it's out for now, and why I say that is these trends tend to come and go through the years. So in a couple of years, it'll all be back again, and then the maximalist shoes will be out. So yeah, it's out. We've noticed an increase in foot injuries like metatarsal stress fractures from these minimalist shoes, and therefore it just sort of died a little bit of a natural death and went away. Okay, so minimalist shoes are gone. What we're looking at now are maximalist running shoes. It's a new genre of running shoe, maximum running shoes. And I spoke about this for the first time in South Africa at our Congress in Stellenbosch in 2015. And this was the latest thing because they look like clown shoes. So maximalist running shoes are shoes that have got thicker cushioning throughout that midsole area in the forefoot and the rear foot, what we call the stack heights. And there's just more cushioning, they're thicker, higher shoes, they're soft, they're very light, they're very comfortable, but that's what maximalist shoes are. And this started over in the States and became quite popular. And in South Africa, it's not really very popular, but you can get them and they are available. So this is the maximalist running shoes, okay? And what it is, it's the stack height values are just higher. So instead of a normal shoe, traditional shoe stack heights of 20 to 24 mils in the rear foot, 10 to 12 in the forefoot, the stack heights are 25 to 30, maybe even to 38 mils in the back, and 18, 24, 35 in the forefoot. So they basically are much, much thicker and softer. So they're like platform running shoes. If anybody remembers platform shoes from the old days, guys like me would remember that quite well. Okay, they do vary in heel drop, and that I'll mention as we go through into the heel drop section. Okay, so you can get this maximalist. It's not the be-all and end-all of running shoes. We still have our traditional running shoes, but it is an interesting genre, and we see not a lot of injuries, but far less injuries than with the minimalist thing. And here's the latest, came out in March, the HOKA One, that's how one pronounces it apparently. This is HOKA 10.9. Now this isn't a road running shoe, it's a downhill running shoe, but it's a maximalist running shoe. So it's not an illusion that is a real HOKA One downhill running shoe. Quite interesting. I think it's quite strange, and probably snow running as well, as you can see that guy doing there. Okay, so it's not a fake, this is for real, but they look like real clown shoes. And just to remind old people like John and people like that about the old maximalist normal shoe days of platform shoes. We all used to have platform shoes to make us taller. It was the in thing. Now that's the in thing in running, makes you taller. Even Crocs have got maximalist shoes, and quite snazzy as well if you look at the colors. So I think they're here to stay, but they're not taking over the running shoe market. That's for sure. They're here to stay, but they sometimes do cause a little bit of injuries because of the materials and the slight instability it might cause. The stack heights of the shoe are very important because that's the height of the material in the front and the height of the material at the back. And that's what gives you the cushioning. And because the rear foot is higher than the forefoot in most shoes, it gives you an elevation which is called a heel drop, which I'm going to talk about as well. So stack heights are very important. The thicker the stack height, the more cushioning, the softer the shoe, and sometimes the more unstable the shoe is So you need to be careful of stack heights, but they are recorded in my running shoe guide, so that if you want to know what your stack heights are of your shoe, go and look it up there in that, and the running shoe stores will know the stack heights of the shoes as well, so that they can help you get the correct shoe. Okay, there's a little bit of research out there on maximalist running shoes. In other words, these increased stack height shoes, there might be an increase in injury. It's not a lot of research out there at this stage, but it's worth looking at. But they are quite good shoes, these increased stack heights. And if you have a look there, most of the other companies have an increased stack height shoe. In other words, a maximalist type shoe. New Balance, you can see there. You can see the Asics shoe as well. But HOKA, One are the very, very first to go into this increased stack height. So they rule the roost. Even at races like the World Triathlon Champs at PAYNE in Hawaii, some of the runners are running in HOKA product, which is quite unusual for a triathlon or a triathlete to be running in this type of shoe. But anyway, the statistics are quite interesting there. The heel drop, there's a few synonyms like heel toe drop, heel toe differential, heel toe lift, heel toe offset, ramp angle. We just call it heel drop. In podiatric terms, it's probably because the heel raise or lift, but a heel drop is really the difference between the forefoot and rear foot stack height. And it's measured in millimeters, so that the rear foot stack is higher than the forefoot stack, okay? And the heel drop can be anything between 0, in other words, a flat shoe, and 12 to 13 millimeters, which is what we would call a traditional heel drop, a little higher. So very low heel drops are 0 to 4 mils, medium heel drops 6 to 8 mils, 10, 12, 13 mils are your traditional heel drops, and you don't really get a negative heel drop shoe, although there was one years ago, but we don't anymore. So if you take the rear foot stack and the forefoot stack and you subtract forefoot from rear foot, gives you your heel drop, okay? There's some very unusual heel drops that can be seen here. Really strange heel drops where there actually aren't any heels there. And that's to encourage you to run more on the forefoot, which is an interesting thing. But we do need to watch out. Heel drops or low heel drops can be bad for you if you're not used to them. Even maximalist running shoes with high stack heights have heel drops as well. So they're thicker, but the heel drop is still there, okay? So it's important that if your patient has any Achilles strains or calf strains, they need to be careful of lower heel drop shoes, because that might aggravate those strains, might increase the tension on the Achilles and the gastrocs, and that could be a bad thing. But a lot of people want to transition to lower heel drops, which they can, and there's shoes out there with low heel drops, but it will take them time to transition to low heel drop shoes. It takes quite a long time, and they need to be really careful. So if you look at shoes out there, we've gone from traditional shoes in the middle to minimalist shoes on the left to maximalist shoes on the right. So we're really oscillating between all these. But what will never go away is our traditional shoes in the middle. They will always be there. What we can add now, if you look on the bottom right, that lovely pretty pink there, I'm sure Belinda and Lauren are quite enjoying that pink color there. The more unusual shoes out there. And this is where the more unusual shoes and technology comes in, the stranger stuff that you've all been reading about and commenting on social media. Okay, the first one is FLUBBER. FLUBBER is soft midsole material. I call it marshmallow type midsole materials. I didn't coin the term FLUBBER, but I used it at first. It's not technically correct, but it just sounds cool to call the midsole FLUBBER. Okay, so there you can see all different funny FLUBBER adverts, but that means softer, more shock absorbing midsoles. So this is what's new. The soft stuff, the midsole material, it's just a more highly cushioned platform where there's a combination of cushioning, maybe call it shock absorption if you want, and energy return. So when you land on the material, it absorbs energy and it gives it back to you as you move forward in your transition from rear foot to forefoot. Okay. In running shoe definition, a soft cushioning material with energy return. And that's important. It's not just a shock absorption material like we had many years ago when running shoes were first invented and injuries were pretty high from that. It's an energy return system. And interesting, as every new flubber comes out, every company reckons their flubber is better than everybody else, and they've got statistics to prove that their percentage of energy return is better. And this flubber often comes in combination with a rocker bottom sole configuration or a carbon plate. Here's an example of a flubber type midsole shoe. Very soft, it's very light, it's very responsive, beautiful cushioning, good durability because the materials are all very good materials. Supposedly can prevent all kinds of injuries as well. The jury's still out on that, the research is still out on that, and they say it can reduce injuries by 52%. Now we're waiting for them to show us some decent science behind what they're saying, but the shoe has a little bit of a rocker bottom type sole, wider platform, just an all-out cushioning shoe, which is interesting because in the past, that was the kiss of death, to have too much cushioning. There's some more soft, flubbery type midsoles, the Essex Nova Blast, responsive running experience. It has a lovely bouncy feeling to energize your stride. It has flight foam materials, which is the name of their materials, also with a midsole geometry engineered for superior bounce. Okay, now the world brainy guys have been talking about this and looking at it, and Craig PAYNE, who all the podiatrists would know, a podiatrist from Australia. They have a PodChat Live podcast every week or month, and they've been talking about this flubbery soft material, midsole material. So I went and I looked at, I could find about 30 different types of flubber in shoes with all different names, and everybody, and if you look at those names, some of them you'll know, like your Fresh Foam and your Boost and those kind of materials. So I found 30 different types. So what I did was I broke it down by company. And if you look, each company's got their own flubber and different flubbers. And I've even got some of the really, really new materials come out, like in your New Balance, that Dynasoft and Fresh Foam X and Flight Foam Blast, Essex, Saucony have got some new, and you'll see later some of their new shoes. But everybody has got their own version of flubber with a different name, but it's all derivatives of EVA or ethylene vinyl acetate. So it's very exciting and makes a shoe look good, because that's where there's a lot of pretty designs in that flubbery soft material, but it's also functional. It's not just soft. Okay, so flubber for your feet. How good or bad is it? The research is showing it might be good because it's energy return, not just pure cushioning, but it's not for everybody. Not everybody likes a soft ride, a soft, comfortable ride in a shoe. Some people prefer a firmer ride. We don't know if this is going to cause less injuries or more injuries. There's still research being done, but it seems like it's a reasonably sort of safe material, if I can call it that. And what a lot of them do is also you use less energy because it's transferring that energy back. So it's reducing the fatigue on your leg muscles and that. Now, the rocker bottom sole is also very important. If you look at some of the new shoes, some of the HOKAs, the Essex, and all shoes, most shoes have got that curvature of the sole underneath. And that, we call it a rocker bottom sole, but they each, or the shoe companies each have their own sort of name for that. And rocker bottom sole means when you land on the rear foot, it's easier to transition over the midfoot to the forefoot because there's that shape of the midsole and outer sole. So it adds to the reduction of fatigue by you running from the rear foot to the forefoot. So it seems quite a good idea. And with the flubber type material, it's a very good idea. Saucony called it speed roll in the Essex Meta Ride. I'm not sure exactly what they call it, but they all have their own names as rocker bottom. But if you think back, anybody who's been in orthopedics and medicine and shoes and that over the years, we've always used rocker bottom soles for people with leg length discrepancies, where you build the shoe up and you need to curve it like that so that it can flex and help the person to propel forward. So we are used to these old-fashioned rocker bottom soles, but they now all they've come back in shoes as a new technology to aid the person's running along with all those other things. Okay, so what's also new is the logic behind running shoes is how can they justify the costs? Well, they just make them unspeakably hideous in terms of the colors. I don't think they're hideous. I think they're all very pretty. The colors are beautiful. The cosmetics are wonderful. So let's go back to old racing shoes. I used to run in a pair of old Tiger Jayhawks, which are Essex nowadays, in 1968, which is when I was quite young still. And that was the running shoe. And if you look at that, it looks quite minimalist in nature. Okay. But if you look at modern racing shoes, they look a bit more like traditional running shoes, but there is masses of technology in these racing shoes. And that's what I'm going to talk about now, is the new technology in racing shoes, and that means carbon plates in running shoes. You've all heard about this, we've all discussed it, we've all argued about it, and yeah, there's been some sort of conclusion to it, which I'll tell you about later. Carbon plated shoes have always been in cycling, but for a totally different reason to carbon plates in a running shoe. And there's some of the latest carbon plated shoes, very unusual shapes of the rear foot you can see there, quite unusual. Okay, so carbon plates in running shoes was what's called the carbon race, or perhaps the race for the super shoe, because these are what's now called super shoes, because they've got all of this technology in them and all of this wonderful carbon technology to make you run faster and better and break world records. Now, I've even got a pair of VAPORFLY 4%. I can just categorically say it hasn't made me run faster. I haven't broken any records, world records, national or other, in these carbon plated shoes. They're not designed for me, they're designed for elite athletes, not just for general runners and joggers and that. Okay, now please understand, this is not an advert for Nike, but they are the first to have brought out carbon plated shoes in the modern era. Okay, so that's why the first section seems to be all about them, but it's not really. You'll see all the other brands have carbon plated shoes as well. So we looked at the history with my friend Craig Cornell from Sweatshop in Johannesburg, and we found that the VAPORFLY 4%, the Nike VAPORFLY shoe with carbon in it, came out in 2016. But if you look back in history, we went back to 2003 and 4, where Adidas actually had a carbon plated running shoe, which was called the Adidas Adistar Competition. So it's not a new thing. It's just in those days, it wasn't seen to be very important or very useful, but nowadays it's a very, very important part of an elite athlete's shoes. Also, far back, even further back in 1991, we found a Brooks Fusion where they talk about propulsion technology in a Brooks running shoe. So when anybody says the Nike VAPORFLY 4% or the ALPHAFLY Next Percent or those type of shoes are discovered this carbon plating shoes, it's not true. They might have refined them, but they didn't discover them. So let's talk about the first one that came out, the Nike VAPORFLY 4%. The 4%, I think they put their meaning, it's going to give you a 4% advantage in running faster and breaking records and stuff like that. And if you look at the little diagram on the right, there's a carbon plate, that red piece there, that lies in the midsole of the shoe. And you can't see it in these shoes. It's hidden away inside, sandwiched in that flubbery React foam or foam X or whatever material there might be in the shoe. So here's a cut down of the shoe. You can see a dotted line where the carbon plate sits in the midsole. You can see a very snazzy upper. And the material is Zoom X foam that's used there for maximum cushioning, apparently 85% energy return. That's what they believe, along with the carbon plate inside there. So this was one of the first that was being used. And from the start, it showed promise that this was going to make our elite athletes run faster. So the function of it, of the carbon plate in the midsole, is to store and release energy when you run onto it and over it and transition to toe off. The material is a nice springy material, once again to work in tandem with the carbon plate to save energy, and it gives advantage, they reckon 4 to 5% faster. Although the research you'll see just now didn't quite have it that high the advantage. But the concern was, does it give you an unfair advantage? Runners were saying, but this is unfair because their sponsored athletes have these shoes that can make them run faster, but I'm sponsored by another company and I don't have shoes to run faster. So there was a lot of unhappiness and a lot of debate about this as to what it does, how it does it, and is it unfair, and is it good, and lots and lots and lots of different people, especially on social media, becoming experts in biomechanics and running shoes, debating this whole issue of the carbon shoes. Okay, I then dug up some references by our own Professor Ross Tucker on talking about the VAPORFLY 4%, Benno Nig from Canada, it's very big into biomechanics, Simon Bartelt from Australia, Craig Payne from Australia, Kevin Kirby from California, more podiatric type guys, and they all looked at this whole issue and debated this issue and spoke about it, and there's a little bit of research out there. Okay, so there's some more of the carbon fly, the VAPORFLY next percent. The first one was the 4%. The next percent was perhaps assuming that it's going to give a different amount of advantage. Okay, so now the next one that came out was the Nike ALPHAFLY. It was a lot more stacked. You can see it. It looks sort of slightly minimalist with cushion sole Zoom X material, but it didn't have one carbon plate. It didn't have two, but it had 3 carbon plates in it. And in the forefoot, you can see it clearly there, it's got pods of Zoom Air. So this shoe's got masses of cushioning, energy return, carbon plates, Zoom Air for energy return and cushioning in the forefoot. It's compared to that little Tiger Jayhawk you saw earlier, this is a lot of shoe. A lot of shoe, okay. And it was a prototype they were going to use for the Ineos 159, which I'll talk about it briefly just now, okay. And now people were starting to say, but is this all mechanical doping? Should this be allowed or not? And that was the whole issue with IAAF in those days. They've changed their name to World Athletics. Is it really fair or not? And some conclusion has been got to. In the bottom part of the diagram, you can see the pink part there is the carbon plates. There's a long one from the rear foot to the forefoot. There's a sort of a half a one, and there's a 4-foot plate. So there are 3 carbon plates in that shoe. Okay, this was the PAYNE diagrams that they used for the shoe. Okay, that's what the outer sole of the shoe looks like. And because it's a racing shoe, you're meant to only run on the forefoot because it's believed that a runner at that speed, at that level, running a world record doesn't run on the heel. He only runs on the forefoot. Well, video footage showing Haile Gebrselassie breaking the world record in the Berlin Marathon. When he was running, he was contacting on the heel and rolling forward at world record pace. But this shoe is assuming you're not going to run on the heel. That's why it's only got outer sole and that type of technology in the forefoot. Okay. So what's next after the ALPHAFLY? So there was a VAPORFLY 4%, the ALPHAFLY next percent. What's next? And I'm going to just mention the marathon world records because now we're going to go into looking at how fast do they really make you or not make you. We all, because we're involved with sport, know a marathon is 42.195 kilometers, 26 miles and a bit in the old language. And what I think is important to show just now the time, the world records. The men's world record is held by Kipchoge. He ran Berlin Marathon in 2018 in 2:01:39. And second, by 2 seconds, is Bekele, who also ran the Berlin Marathon a year later in 2:01:41. So remember that just now, because there's going to be very soon a big race between those two. The ladies' marathon records 2:14:04 by Koskai in Chicago, also a Kenyan runner. They're all Kenyan runners. And second, Mary Kitani in London ran a 2:17:01. So we can see these are very, very fast times. But when it comes to the Ineos 1:59, you'll see it's not a world record, no, but you'll see what happened to that time in that event. Okay, so March this year, what was interesting, the Nike Air Zoom ALPHAFLY Next Percent came out and was going to be used at the American Olympic trials. But what they did, because people were complaining so much about not having the shoe, they offered every runner running the trials a free pair of the ALPHAFLY Next Percent, even if they were sponsored by other companies. So runners could have the opportunity to run in these, and even if they weren't sponsored. Now, that's a bit of a naughty thing to do, to encourage runners from other companies to run in your shoe, but it was an interesting thing to do. And there's, I think that was the look of that shoe that they were using at the Olympic trials. Okay. There's a lot of interesting stats about the use of these carbon-plated, at this point, mostly Nike shoes. The trials, Olympic trials results, all the men had Nike carbon-plated shoes on, but the women didn't. The first one had a HOKA Rocket X, the second had a Saucony Endorphin Pro, and the third one had a Nike. So it's not all about Nike carbon-plated shoes, but statistically, if you look at how high Nike on there, and this was the whole Olympic shoe event or trials, you can see how many people were wearing Nikes, and I can tell you most of those were 4% or ALPHAFLYs. Okay, so now people were saying this should be banned, it's bad, it's not fair, and all of that type of thing. There was huge press about the possible banning of the shoes, the super shoes, and that type of thing. Okay, now it was very controversial. Should they ban the carbon plate or the thick stack heights or both? It was a very, very difficult one, and people were saying it gives unfair advantage, and they were bleating a lot. So what happened in 31st of Jan this year is World Athletics, or the old IAAF, said the shoe is not banned. Okay, the shoe is not banned, but there's new rules as to how the shoes can be integrated and used in running, especially at that high level, but to be legal shoes. So it wasn't banned, it's now possible, but there are rules. And the rules are very simple. The shoe must be available to any athlete, to you and me, or to an elite athlete, 4 months before a competition. So you can't bring out a new shoe a month before and use it in the Olympics, no. It's got to have been out for 4 months. Prototypes cannot be used in those kind of events. They banned, and you will get banned as well. Sole no thicker than 40 mils of stack height, which is your highest stack height, 40 millimeters, can't be used. But it can only have one carbon plate, a full one or a half a one. It doesn't matter the shape, how thick it is, but only one carbon plate. And the actual shoe must be inspected after the race. Now, it won't happen to you and I, but that could happen to elite runners at the end of a race. Can be inspected. How they do that, I don't know. Do they cut the shoe in half and look at the carbon plate inside? I'm not really sure. But there'll be a lot of more research into this whole idea, but at least they can be used now, and it stopped everybody from complaining on Facebook and on social media and stuff like that. This doesn't obviously affect high jump shoes, sprinting shoes, and those type of shoes that also have plastic and carbon type material in the plate. So it's just no banning, just new rules for this. Now, you know what social media is like, people put all kinds of rubbish on there, and this is now called the Nike VAPORFLY 200%. This is a joke, okay? This is what Kipchoge is going to run in next year, and he's hoping to do in 1 hour 30 minutes. A new world record in the ALPHAFLY 200%. Okay, it's not a real shoe, it's just somebody playing around on social media. So now the debate went on and on and on. Why they were going to ban it, but they didn't ban it. And there's documented rules of how they can be used, and the spirit of athletics, and everybody must be able to use it, and fairness, and all that type of thing. So it all seems to have quietened down at this point. Obviously, there was no Olympics where it was going to be a big thing to have carbon-plated shoes in Olympic marathon and that type of thing, even in races like London Marathon, New York, Boston, all of those marathons, which obviously haven't happened. Okay. All right, there is some research out there, and I'm not talking the blogs and social media stuff, research as in the impact of VAPORFLYs on elite marathon performance. There was a research there. The conclusion was there's clear improvement in performance in marathon times in both males and females in top 20 elite athletes. It was a fairly big cohort there. The improvements coincide with the release of the VAPORFLY 4%. So it was early on in the carbon plated, okay. And then all the usual suspects, the researchers and the podiatric guys and Ross and Benno Nig all commented on how much. Ross Tucker, and I heard him on a good podcast on 702 about the whole issue, he reckons it gives an advantage of a 2% to 2.5% benefit to the runner at that elite level. Obviously, you need the genetics also to run at that level, but the shoe does have some advantage for you, okay. He goes on to say a lot about it, very interesting to read. If you go onto his website, he has a very nice article on this. But there are independent studies that show that Nike shoes have a significant effect on the physiology of the runner to make them run faster. The boys overseas, podiatrist Craig Payne and these guys, also lots and lots of talk about this, and all seem to be in agreement, and it does give an advantage, but how much it does, nobody really knows. So there's, and I think in my references I gave to Robin, there's mention of these kind of references you can go and look at. Okay, Simon Bartold and Benno Nig spoke a little bit about it as well, and everybody agrees, nobody disagrees. Okay, so the research shows an improvement. There was a study, you can see here, Cornell University, and it showed out of 308 men, improvement of 1.5 to 2.9%. It wasn't quite 4%, but it was still quite reasonable. It showed a little bit less in the ladies, and we used 270 ladies in various races to do the research, from 0.8% to 2.4%. I'm pleased to say mine's given me 0% increase in my performance out there. Okay, so there is research to go and look at, very interesting. Journal of Science and Medicine in Sport say it does increase midsole bending stiffness of sporting shoes, redistribute a lower limb joint working during running. Talk about the bending now of the carbon plate and how much should it bend, how thick it should be slightly angled, should it be, so they're looking at all those finer details of the carbon plate as well. Okay, now what the Zoom X VAPORFLY and the VAPORFLY 4% very famous for is the INEOS 159 challenge. And this was a challenge to see if a human being can run a marathon distance in under 2 hours. This was not a race. This is not the world record by any means. It was simply looking at something to see if it can be done. Okay, see if it can be done. All right. So in Vienna in October last year, 2019, there was this run called the INEOS 159. Sponsored run. Kipchoge, you can see him there in the white vest with slightly different shoes to the rest of the guys. These other guys in the picture are his pacemakers. So every 5Ks, world elite runners pacemaking him for 5Ks, and then a new cohort of pacemakers would come in from the Ingebrigtsen brothers and top class runners, okay? And it just was a proof of concept that it could be done, but it's not a race, Okay, it was tried previously in May 2017 in Italy, the first attempt where they tried it on a track slightly different to this, but Kipchoge could only do a 2 hour and 25 seconds. He didn't break 2 hours. Okay, but still remember, it's not a world record. So what happened at Ineos 159, which is in Vienna? We all sat early hours of the morning watching it live for 2 hours is the time we watched it for, and it was I found it very interesting as a runner to watch this and to see how this was performed. Okay, so what happened was Kipchoge from Kenya went out there and he ran 1 hour, 59 minutes and 40 seconds. He actually broke the 2 hour mark for a marathon distance. And I watched him at the end, and I believe he could have run another 1 or 2 minutes faster because he was cruising at the end there. So he did what he wanted to do, to break 2 hours. And yeah, just some pictures of the pacemakers on the top left there, all running in formation in front of him for reducing the wind resistance. If you look at the middle picture, a laser light showed Kipchoge where to run on that exact spot. The car in front was going at the absolute correct speed so that he could run a sub 2 hour timing. He had people on bicycles with computers and nutrition and fluids. So everything was perfect. It was a beautiful day for running, and he managed to run that. Okay, so it was the most wonderful thing to watch. It was like the runner's version of watching ballet. Okay, so he did a 1:59 40.2. His pacemakers, there were 41 of them, and they even had 6 spare pacemakers. I was asked to pacemake, but I was actually busy that weekend, and they were all elite world-class runners. This is not a world record, as people are saying, but it wasn't a world record. It wasn't meant to be. There was only one runner in this race. It wasn't a sanctioned race by World Athletics, and he had pacemakers and seconding on bicycles and stuff. Okay, but for those runners out there, he was running 2 minutes and 50 seconds per kilometer for almost every one of those kilometers. Okay, that's like going to your local park run and running it in 14 minutes. But doing 8 of them after each other in 14 minutes a time. So the pace he was running at was incredible. And if you look at his splits for the 5K splits, he was within a few seconds. It was just very scientific and incredible. There he is finishing in 1:59.40, the Ineos 1:59. There you can see splits on the right, and if you can read quickly, he was within a few seconds every 5K splits because of the way they planned it, and he did it. Okay, so it's not a world record. So it was meant to be a race on the 26th of April at the London Marathon between Kipchoge and Bekele in a road race, sanctioned, an official race, to see who could run under 2 hours. But obviously it never happened because of COVID, and most races were cancelled, and you couldn't really do this in a virtual race. But London Marathon has been pushed forward to the 4th of October, which is coming up. Now, if ever you want to watch a marathon that's important, watch the London Marathon, because there's going to be a race between Kipchoge and Bekele to see who can break 2 hours in a normal road race, and I kind of predict they probably can do it. If anybody can, these 2 guys can do it. Okay. What is quite interesting as well, a lot of the other sponsored athletes were also trying to run in these carbon-plated Nike shoes because they were so famous, and they gave you 4% or 2.5% benefit, but they were running in them, and what they were doing is they were blacking out or whiting out their running shoes. In other words, they would take a black Cokie pen and take the logo off the shoe that they were going to run in, so you couldn't see what shoe it was. Okay, which is naughty to do. They shouldn't do it. They're bad to do that. But it was quite interesting to see how they were doing that just to get to use the carbon-plated shoe technology that was around. Okay, so that's black out or white out your running shoes if you want to try out the opposition's shoes. Now, Adidas, they seem to have started the carbon race back many years ago, but they do have some modern shoes And I'm going to go through all the brands that have got some modern carbon plated shoes. So Adidas have got, and that might be interesting at London Marathon, because there's a very, very big race between Nike and Adidas in terms of who's going to break a 2-hour or who's going to break the world record. There's a shoe of the Adidas called the Sub 2 shoe as well. Okay, so Adidas do have carbon plated shoes. Adizero Pro, it's a prototype. I think it's probably now available because that was a long time ago. Interesting. They're also coming out, and they also have the Adizero Pro. We'll see. It has got a carbon fiber plate in it, and it has got the nice, the different midsole materials. So it's pretty much got the pedigree of perhaps a sub 2 or a world record type shoe. Okay. HOKA, One. Remember, these are the maximalist running shoe guys. This is what their shoes really look like. But they have got a Carbon X and a Carbon Rocket, which is a maximalist running shoe with a carbon plate. Okay, so they've also gone that way. They're not as crazy looking as some of the other shoes, but they've also got, and for a maximalist company, that's quite interesting, because I think they were pretty close after Nike to come out with a carbon plated shoe. Okay, we've been through the Nike shoes. Okay, this is what the new Zoom ALPHAFLY Next Percent looks like. Very nice looking with Zoom X material and then single carbon plates. There's also another new cosmetic of the same shoe, 250 US. Multiply that by, it's close to 20 or something to the rand. Very, very expensive. You can get them here. A few in some of the specialist running stores. You can get them online. Just got to be careful of fake product and stuff like that. New Balance also have carbon plated shoe, fuel cell 5280, carbon plated shoes, a very, very good racing shoe, very light shoe, doesn't have some of the unusual features of some of the other shoes, but New Balance also have some new midsole FLUBBER materials and carbon plated shoes. This is the Fuel Cell RC Elite, coming out pretty soon, on 15th of the 9th. So it won't be long, but it'll be here. Looks a bit more like a traditional shoe, but it's also carbon plated. Brooks. Now they say never leave home without your Brooks. Brooks running shoes. They've also got carbon plate, and Daisy Linden was one of the athletes who wasn't really happy about not having a Nike 4% VAPORFLY, but she's sponsored by Brooks, and they do have a carbon plate. It's 1 millimeter, but it has a raised spine in the middle of it, so it's got like a ridge of slightly thicker material. So it's quite interesting, the changes in the carbon plates that are coming through there. Saucony, or Saucony, as they would say in America, have come out and just about 2 weeks ago, come out with the endorphin range. Can be seen there. One of them carbon plated, the one at the top, the Endorphin Pro, carbon plated. It has just landed on the 11th of last month at a sum total of 4,500 Rand a pair. So these are high-end shoes, carbon plated shoes, new technology. The Endorphin Speed has a TPU, thermoplastic unit plate, that's the middle shoe, and your shift doesn't have. So there's the Endorphin range, and what was very interesting is this range of shoes was sold out before the shops even got them in. There was a list of people wanting to buy them, and they paid and bought them before the shoes even hit the shelves out there. The Endorphin range, and there you can see some of the technology in the Pro. Very interesting, very new. Saucony tended to be a bit more of a traditional type of brand, but they really stepped up big time in terms of the Endorphin range. Okay, so there you can see they're not all ultra expensive. You can see your Zoom Nike Zoom VAPORFLY 4%. You can get it online, I think, at about 9,000 Rand a pair, which is quite steep. Okay, who said running shoes has to be ugly? If you look at Saucony's Mutant collection, nothing to do with carbon. Have a look at those beautiful cosmetics in shoes. And it's so important because some people like to have a shoe that matches their running outfit or their club colors. I can see the Nedbank club colors in green. And so these are some of the beautiful cosmetic shoes coming out. Asics, we've given such lovely prizes for the end tonight, so please stay online. The Meadow Ride doesn't have a carbon sole, no, but because of the midsole material and the rocker bottom shape, has incredible energy saving, all right, because of the flight foam and gel inside it, but it has a 0 heel drop shoe. So one just has to be a little careful of that if one's not used to a lower or a 0 heel drop shoe. But this shoe will reduce energy consumption while running and hopefully reduce injuries as well. And in fact, there's one of those up for prize giving later. Glide Ride, also no carbon, similar to the Meta Ride, but it does have a 5mm heel drop. So you can see not all of the shoes are carbon, but they have features that make them work better. What has just come out is their Meta Racer, and you can see it's a special for the Tokyo Olympics, which didn't happen, but nevertheless the shoe's out, has a stiff midsole, rocker bottom shape, you can see, but it does have carbon in it, and it's a racing shoe. Okay, so yeah, is their version of a carbon-plated racing shoe, but it's such a nice looking shoe because look at those. This is their special Tokyo Olympics. And later on, they've given us 3 prizes: the Evo Ride in white, the Glide Ride there in black, and the Meta Ride in blue. So there's 3 wonderful Asics prizes for us to give away later. Mizuno, it's a smaller brand in this country, excuse me, but they do have not a carbon, but they have a full length energy midsole. So also not carbon, but also it has the effect similar to carbon in those soft midsoles. I just found this week their new midsole technology. They say it's 293% more supple than what I'm not sure, and 56% more energy return. And there, everybody's after how much energy return does the shoe give them. This one, I think you would bounce along quite happily. It must be quite an unusual feeling. All right, Puma have got some a Pro Plate, which is a propulsion plate inside, which does aid, very similar to a carbon plate, to propel you forward. The Puma Speed 600 2, which is their second version. Puma Speed 300 Racer also has a Pro Plate or a propulsion plate. That's what it stands for, but they do have similar shoes. I just added in a new material called calculated cushioning that they're putting into their shoes in collaboration with MIT in the States. And you can see the bottom right picture, these like figure of 8 type designs. This is their new material. And they're coming out with a new range that is, I haven't seen it yet. Love to have seen it while I'm down in Cape Town, but time has run away. A new cushioning material. But they do have carbon plates or Pro Plates, but they've got lovely cushioning material as well. Okay, so Skechers. I know Skechers are shoes for grannies to walk around the malls, but Skechers have technical running shoes, and Skechers also have carbon plates in shoes. Okay, the Skechers Speed Elite. Under Armour, very much a nice looking brand, but they have got technical shoes as well. They have a P-back propulsion plate, which is very similar to carbon kind of thing. And the shoe tracks you when you run and tells you where you are and tells you your gait and your cadence and all kinds of interesting things when you run. So Under Armour even stepping up into the technical running shoe thing. Rehbock. Now, I'm not sure whether that's a carbon-plated shoe or whether that's FLUBBER in the midsole of that shoe. So I'll just let you have your own opinion on that, and we'll take it from there. Okay. On, also a newish brand, a Swiss running shoe brand, coming to South Africa. Doesn't have a pure carbon insert in their shoe. They have a speed board material, which is carbon infused. So it's obviously a combination of the 2 materials with the Helion super foam kind of thing. So I've seen a lot of these around, commonly used for people to walk around in, but they do have some technology in their shoes worth looking at, thinking about. I've included Mr. Price Max, and you might laugh and say, but we're talking technical running shoes. But Mr. Price Max have come out with a more technical range of running shoes because they're now sponsors of the Comrades Marathon. They are the technical sponsors. And I've been fortunate to have 3 of their models and try them out, the Marathon Racer, the Marathon Trainer, you can see on the left there. And they're all in the region of about 500 Rand a pair. And why I think that's important. It's wonderful to talk about 4, 5, 6, 9,000 Rand for a pair of running shoes. But the masses, your entry-level runners need a basic shoe to run in, and these are basic, and no disrespect meant. They're basic, they're entry-level, they're neutral, at 400, 500 Rand a pair. This, in my opinion, can only be a winner for the mass participants out there. But if you look at their pedigree, they do sponsor an elite team, and that elite team have won many, many medals. Gift Kalehi and runners like that who won Comrades and won many gold medals in Mr. Price Max running shoes. I haven't seen next year's drop yet, but hopefully I will see that soon just to be able to see what's coming in. Okay. We found Li Ning, a Chinese brand, which apparently is a very big brand in China. I've never heard of it before, but I think it's also one of the first shoes after the Nike VAPORFLY 4% to come out with a carbon plate in it. Okay, so there it is, very nice looking carbon plate and all of that type of thing. Now there's an easier way to put a carbon plate in your running shoe if you need. You can buy an inner sole that's a carbon plate and put it inside to stiffen up that midsole and have the effect of a carbon plate. And these are over-the-counter carbon plate inners you can buy. There's one of the brands that's a complete inner sole with a carbon plate. So I thought, oh, no, bull, I'm going to go one further, and I made my own carbon plate. It wasn't carbon, it was polyethylene material, and I put it inside the shoe, and you know what? It didn't make me run any faster, that carbon plate. Couldn't even feel it there, but it was just my idea of trying something really crazy. Okay, there's a difference between carbon fiber and TU plates, but they are very similar in terms of the effect that they give while you're running. A thought was, what about carbon fiber plated running shoes with orthotics in them? And you know what? Nobody really knows, and I spoke to all my mates and podiatrists and people around the world, and nobody really knows. But people will start looking at, so, okay, can you run with an orthotic in a carbon fiber plated shoe or not? Okay, here's some carbon plated shoes, BMW brand and all kinds of other strange ones. Yeah, I don't think you can run in those though. Kangaroo jumps, are they carbon plated as well? I'm really not sure. I'm not sure if they would be legal running a marathon in those. These are some really double stacked sort of shoes with funny devices in. But the World Athletics have come up with a list of accepted running shoes as of last month that I think there's 100 or whatever on at the moment, but they have a list of what shoes are legal from a carbon plate point of view. So there is a list available, I'm sure it's on their website. Okay, lastly, let's get into shoe prescribing. Last bit, yeah, I've got about 10 minutes left, otherwise I'm going to be in serious trouble. Shoe prescribing is very, very difficult. You must keep it simple. If the patient's happy with their shoes, please don't change them. If they're not injured and they're happy, you must stick to what works. Please be careful of you and your patients listening to the gurus on social media. Just there's so much nonsense going on there and watch the costs. In my day, shoes were 10 Rand a pair. Now you can pay up to 4,500, 7,500 Rand a pair. As I said, that's why some of the brands have got lower costs, which are better for the masses out there. Okay. In podiatry, a lot of the paradigms of biomechanics have been looked at and challenged and changed. For the good, for the bad, I don't know. We in South Africa tend to be a little resistant to changing our paradigms and our thinking. So we just probably merrily going on in the old-fashioned way, or what I call the traditional way, as opposed to changing our paradigms. Okay. But when it comes to prescribing running shoes, there is a change in how we prescribe shoes. Now, there are many factors in prescribing a shoe. The type of shoe will depend on what it's used for. Is it a road shoe, trail shoe, racing shoe, a track shoe? Is it you need cushioning? Is it you need a minimalist shoe, maximalist? The size, width, the heel drop, the color. There's so many issues with deciding on a shoe that for the poor runner, it's very difficult. And for the poor practitioner, it's very difficult to say exactly what shoe. Okay. Now, the old paradigm of prescribing running shoes was to categorize people into different categories of support. Strong anti-pronation shoes for the person who pronates excessively, and that possibly being a cause or related to their injury. A mild anti-pronation shoe for somebody who needs just a little bit of stability, or a neutral shoe for somebody who's got an absolute normal functioning neutral foot. And we would characterize people or categorize them into those different categories and then tell them what category or what shoe to go and buy. Now, that's been frowned upon a little bit, okay? But when I spoke to my mates and colleagues around the world, most podiatrists, and you can see some of the countries, are still doing it in that traditional way. Okay, many running shoes, stores do perform gait analysis in stores. It's not a biomechanical examination because it's only the gait analysis part of it with treadmills and all of that. And they really are also doing this by putting people into those categories of strong anti-pronation, mild and neutral type running shoes. Okay. When we send patients to get shoes, we always send to the specialists, the very specialist shoes like the Sweatshop, Runaway Sport in Pretoria, Run Store in Cape Town, Sports Zone in Durban, Durban Runner, PB Naidu, Athlete's Foot, Randburg Run. These are the specialist stores where they are more knowledgeable. We tend not to send to the slightly more fashionable sports stores because they might not have all the ranges and all of that. Okay. So the traditional method is to do a biomechanical examination and a gait analysis and decide what shoe would benefit the patient. You need to be careful. It's not important to change the patient's mechanics if there isn't a need to do that, as in the patient is injured because of that. Okay. Also bear in mind if they're going to wear orthotics or not. So that's how we did it in the traditional way. What's happened? Oh, that was in Naples in Italy, where you can buy your over-the-counter orthotics just off a rack in the old town of Naples. All right, so the world seems to still be following the traditional way. Italy as well is following the traditional way of categorizing shoes. Now the new way, and this at those the PAP congresses are presented in Naples, the new way is if the patient's shoe feels good, buy it, take it home and wear it. So it was all about the feeling and the comfort of the shoe. The weight, body mass of the patient is also important, and whether they're going to do longer distance or shorter distance, cost of the shoe, the surface they run on, how old they are, their fitness level, their injury history, the fit of the shoe. So these are the new sort of things of ways of looking at what the patient needs in terms of their shoes. All right. Not much talk about their biomechanics, but looking at that. The ride of the shoe has become very important. How it feels when you run in it. Is it a firm ride or a soft ride or a hard ride? And that's what's very important. So that's why I've put this little bit of info about the ride and how it feels. And the patient must be happy, or the customer must be happy with how it feels. Does it feel good? And I always say, if you put that shoe on and it feels great, then take it home because that's probably the shoe for you. Okay, so this, and one could perhaps go to the podcast and take this down and have a look at it and think about these things. And this is what we've been told is the new way to do it. Having said that, most running stores I know do it the traditional way, and perhaps a bit of this. Most podiatrists, I think, do it in a traditional way with maybe a bit of these ideas of the new way of prescribing running shoes. Okay, Benno Nick from Canada also tried to talk a bit about the ride and what the ride means, and it's been defined as the comfort definition relating to the smoothness of the transition of the foot through the stance phase of gait and that type of thing. So it's all about comfort and feel, and letting the foot just do its own natural movement in the shoe while you're running, so that the shoe doesn't change the mechanics of the foot. My personal opinion is I'm not sure about this yet, but I'm looking into it to see where we're going to from that point of view. Okay. If you don't know too much about the different brands and shoes there, my guide, and you'll see a picture of it later, you can use that to help you in terms of categorizing shoes. Use a reputable store, go and visit the store, make friends with the store, visit them regularly to see what they've got and that type of thing. But comfort is most important, and what's coming out is the function is slightly less important. And that's debatable, we can argue about it, but that's how it seems to go. Just watch out for those heel drops. I always worry a little bit about going too low too quickly and that type of thing. Okay, pronation control, and everybody seems to be suddenly against, oh, pronation is dead, and pronation is a lot of nonsense, and all of this type of thing. It's so debatable in podiatry that it's actually getting quite boring at this stage. Okay. On my guide, I've got very few anti-pronation shoes in it because companies are making less and less anti-pronation or motion control running shoes because they're just not selling these days. They're making more neutral shoes that might be a bit stable or neutral shoes that might be a bit softer, but there's very few of these strong anti-pronation shoes. So if the patient needs some kind of control, what we do nowadays is neutral shoes with an orthotic inside and stuff like that. I just asked permission to borrow a slide from David Ives, a good friend and colleague of mine, about overpronation, and he talks and he says in his conclusion of his PASA talk, it's an overall trend to show that overpronation may increase the risk of injury. Yes, we've always believed that. The majority of the studies show an association, but not necessarily a cause. So we think overpronation can cause injuries, but in days gone by, we believed it caused every injury that there was. It was because the person was pronating. And now it's quite clear from the studies that it's not true. And maybe at some stage we can get David on as well to talk also about shoe prescription. He has a very, very good presentation on that. So we will make a note of that. Okay. Oh, sorry. So using the old shoe for diagnostic purposes is good. Looking at the wear patterns on the shoe, the insole, how the upper is disintegrating or wearing is very, very useful for us as podiatrists and any clinician. It does help with your biomechanical information that you're going to get from the shoe. And we all know when those new shoes feel good, oh, it feels so nice, doesn't it? Okay, I was going to talk about technical running socks, but I haven't got time for that. But just sock technology is absolutely amazing out there these days. And maybe at a later stage, we can talk about the different technology in socks and materials and that type of thing. Just in conclusion, I want to remind you about my technical running guide on my website. Very difficult one to remember, footdoctor.co.za, and look at the full guide. Look at the biomechanical guide or the traditional way of support, neutral, soft, anti-pronation kind of. Look at the brand guide. There's a very nice sock guide. And in the information, the heel drops are recorded, the stack heights are recorded to help you in terms of understanding what kind of shoe it is. Okay, there's the sock guide. Very interesting, very pretty socks. But make friends with your expert running shoe stores. As I said, visit them, take them donuts, have coffee, look at what they've got. They can also impart a lot of knowledge to help you for when you send your patient to them. Okay, so lastly, Alan Smith, thanks very much for Essex and the wonderful prizes, which John was going to sort out later. And I can see there's already 192 questions, so I'm not sure how we're going to get through that in the time. But thanks to WiSH and SASMA, John, Belinda, Robin, Lauren, and everybody, thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Dennis.
I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay.
Awesome. So, as Dennis has said, there are 193 questions. So it's going to be quite difficult to get through all of them in the evening. So we're going to try and cover, you know, as much as what we can in this evening. So Dennis, don't disappear.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these questions are going to be directed at you.
Lauren's here as well.
Oh, okay, so the first question that comes out is from John, actually, where he says, you know, if you find a shoe that works for you and it needs replacing, the next minute the model's no longer available, you know, why do they change the models of shoes so quickly? And then adding on to that, there were a lot of questions about the shelf life of shoes. So for example, if I find a pair of shoes that really work for me, can I go to the store and buy 5 pairs? And will they last for however long I need them to last?
All right, no, you can't buy a shoe and keep it for 5 years. The material will degenerate in the cupboard because that's what it does. Now, a shoe is designed for between 800 and 1200 kilometers of running, but it depends on your weight, depends on the terrain you run on, depends on your body mass, your body weight. So there's a lot of factors that will make it last shorter or longer. So keeping a running shoe for 5 years in a cupboard is not on. You need to buy fresh shoes when necessary. But the problem that John brought up was shoe models change. So if you look at the Pegasus 38 is out now, that means that the shoe's been around for 38 years. In different forms, every year there's a new model. Okay, but they do change slightly. They put slightly different materials, colors. They don't always stay the same. And that's where the problem lies, where you buy the same model, the same shoe, but the newer version, but it actually is not the same shoe. So it is very difficult. If you have that situation and you need to go back, look for another model of shoe as close to that as possible in the same brand or in another brand. But it's very frustrating for the poor runners out there. That's what they do.
No,
if I could add in there as well, something that I would encourage people to do is seek out a podiatrist who also knows and prescribes a lot of running shoes. Dennis co-hosts with me every year a technical running shoe masterclass that we do for podiatrists and other healthcare professionals, where we go through quite a lot of the shoes, and only like non-podiatrists realize how much tech is actually in these shoes. So if in doubt, refer to a podiatrist so that the patient can get adequate advice, and also an appropriate shoe shop that Dennis was talking about earlier, because they have an amazing fountain of knowledge. They understand how the shoe technology has changed, and they also understand the new tech that a company might have brought in.
Thanks, Lauren. Another common question that comes up, I think, with a lot of runners, Dennis, is the black toenails and the blisters, and, you know, in terms of your toe box, how much space must you leave so that you don't get your blisters and your bruised toenails, and what do you do to avoid getting that?
All right, the fitting of a shoe is very important. The shoe mustn't be too short, otherwise you're going to stub your toes and get blue nails. But the shoe mustn't also be too long, otherwise your foot will slide up and down. So the rule is you need a thumb's width of space between the longest toe and the end of the shoe when you're standing up. So there needs to be, you know, like a centimeter and a half of space. So your foot can move around a little bit, but with the laces it will be held so it doesn't slide too much. So the fitting is very, very important to prevent blue toenails and friction and getting blisters and stuff like that. And that's where your running store will aid your patient or the customer in terms of fitting the shoe properly.
Thank you.
Lacing is also quite important on that. Sorry, Belinda. Lacing is, and that was a question that came up quite a bit, is different lacing techniques. And people have different shaped foots, or feet, should I say. And it's really, really important that you're lacing the shoe correctly, like using a box lace if you have a very high arch. It actually perfects the fit a little bit more, making sure that you use a heel lace lock technique to prevent the foot from sliding forward in the shoe when running. Because yes, laces have awesome tech in them. They are designed to prevent that sliding and loosening of the lace, but there's going to be some kind of loosening of the lace while you're running. So using something like a heel lace lock technique is also beneficial to make sure that that foot is secure in that shoe and it's not going to shift, and that will help prevent blisters and toe bruising as well. But blisters also talks about socks. And Dennis briefly touched on that. Socks are my thing. Dennis knows that he always teases me when he goes out to the sock factories in like Belega in Cape Town, because he knows I want to go there. But socks are a really, really important consideration with your shoe as well.
Would you like to elaborate on that, Lauren, at all? I mean, I also love Belega socks. That's all I run in. They're the most comfortable shoes out. Sorry, socks. Any other considerations?
So the great thing about a sock is that, yeah, Dennis is holding one of the silver ones up there, is socks come in different thicknesses. So you get a thin, you get a thick, you get a thick and thin, you get all sorts of combinations. You get different cuff heights as well of the sock. And also a lot of runners will typically run in a thick bottom sock with a thin on top. So there's venting on top of the sock to dissipate heat. But a lot of the proper running socks have amazing yarn technology that they use. So a lot of our, like for instance, Belega uses an imported yarn from the States. And I think Falke does as well. I'm not sure, Dennis, you might have to correct me there. You were at the factory earlier this year. And there's a moisture wicking technology that comes with this yarn is important, because making sure that you're getting rid of that moisture off the skin of the foot will help prevent blisters as well, so that you can go into because the shoe also has venting. So as soon as you have venting on the sock, you have venting on the shoe, and that all needs to work together to help prevent blisters as well. It also influences the fit and the feel of the shoe. So some people will say, oh, I feel too cramped when I'm wearing a thick sock, so they'll go for a thinner sock. Some people will say, I sweat excessively, so then they've got to make sure that they're using like a really good sock. Like Injinji is a toe sock that goes around, you know, it individually wraps all your toes, so it helps dissipate moisture really well to prevent interdigital blistering and friction. So these are important. So Injinji, Falke, Belega, OnCloud also have a brand available, but a good running shoe store should have a good variety of socks available. And take note of the compression bands within the sock as well, because that influences the fit of the shoe or the feel more of the shoe than anything else.
Thanks for that. A lot of questions have come out as well. Road shoes versus trail shoes. And a lot of people are asking, can they run on the road in their trail shoes? And is it then good to run trails in trail shoes and road in road shoes? And are there any considerations in swapping these two or rotating these shoes?
Yes, there's a difference between a road shoe and a trail shoe in terms of how it's constructed and the materials used and the other sole materials and stuff like that. So it's really not wise to run trail in a road shoe or to run road in a trail shoe. Unless you're going to just run a little sandy path or a road, you can do it in your road shoes. That's not a problem. But it's best to stick to the proper shoes for the proper terrain that you're running on. It's a lot safer, especially the trail shoes that have got very good sticky outer sole type materials, graphene and those type of things, so that you don't slip as much on wet rocks and things like that. So you can run a bit of each in the other type shoes, but it's still best to focus on the exact shoe for that function.
We do notice quite a few runners who will feel a lot more unstable when they take their road running shoe into a trail running circumstance. And you've got to remember that a trail shoe is stiffer and much more rigid to help, because you're running on an uneven, very uneven surface. So it's trying to create stability, as opposed to a road, which is quite a stable surface compared to trail running. So going and doing some hectic trail running in a road shoe, you're going to land up with a lot of instability and predispose yourself to injury.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, so a lot of questions, forgive me, Dennis, if you have covered this, but there's a lot of questions being asked in terms of transitioning from minimalist to your maximalist shoe and vice versa? And what kind of period do you need to actually transition between the two?
Yes, it's very important if you're going to change dramatically to take it very slow in doing it. Otherwise, if you buy the shoes on a Saturday, your minimalist shoe, and run a 21K on a Sunday, you're going to kill your Achilles and your calf. So I believe it would take probably about 6 or more months to transition by slowly walking in the minimalist or the maximalist you're going to and getting used to it, and then slowly jogging in it. But I think moving up from minimalist to normal or to maximalist is a lot easier than going from maximalist down to minimalist. I think that is the dangerous direction to go into. So a good 6 months of taking it very gentle, getting some good advice on how to do it, how not to do it, so that you don't get those Achilles tendons and calf muscles injured and metatarsals injured because of the sudden transition.
And would you recommend, so someone like me, that's number one on the wrong side of 40, and that's been running in, you know, supported shoes for 20, 30 years, to go minimalist?
Not at all, no. I think that unfortunately the older you get, the more chance there is of damaging your calves and Achilles. So no drastic changes. Rather just stick to what works and don't change unless you have to because the shoe's not available anymore or anything like that. So I wouldn't suggest it. And we have people come every day, want to run bare feet, want to run minimalist, and we try and talk them out of it because it's just too dangerous for them. Rather just stick to what's worked, don't change what's worked, and just keep buying the same shoe model. Hopefully it's going to be the same.
Oh, no, I'm in first. Anyway, so then also a lot of questions coming out in terms of, and you know, maybe you can answer these two together in terms of why are running shoes not lasting anymore? Suddenly they become twice the price and they're lasting half the time. And then secondly, a lot of runners asking, what do they need to look for with regards to when to replace their shoes?
Okay, look, yes, running shoes aren't lasting long. I think from a business point of view, they don't want them to last too long because then people buy more shoes. Now, that's all very well if you're sitting in the United States and your new pair of shoes is going to cost you $30 or $40 or $50 or something like that. Sitting out here in Africa with exchange rates, the shoes cost us so much more, and it's a very, very big investment. And that is a very difficult thing because do you buy 6 pairs of Mr. Price Max versus 1 pair of HOKA One? And yes, there's just no answer to that. But we use the shoe wear patterns for diagnostic purposes. But the runner who's wearing the shoe needs to also be able to tell if the shoe's now past its sell-by date, if it's finished. And that's primarily based on how many Ks you run in it. Not how long you've had it, but how many Ks. So when that gets to 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 Ks, then it's probably going to be shot, unless you are a thin, anorexic type elite runner and you weigh 40 kgs, which is none of us, okay? So they need to know, and most of them can feel. It feels like there's stones on the road that you can feel when you run in on them that could indicate that midsole's getting a bit rubbery. By pushing the front of the shoe and feeling how soft the midsole is, by looking at the outer sole wear patterns to see if the carbon rubber has worn away and worn down to the midsole material. So there's ways and means of assessing it yourself, but all you need to do is take it to the specialist running store and say, have a look at these, what do you think of these? And they will go through that process with their knowledge as well.
I also find, when I start picking up little niggles, I know my running shoes are shot, but it's been a long time since I've had running shoes lasting for 1,000 Ks. I mean, they get to about 800 nowadays, and they need to be replaced.
But just be careful of that. If you get niggles, that's a good sign that you're picking up. But many runners always blame the running shoe for the injuries. The first thing they say, no, it must be my shoes. They don't think, oh, maybe it's my training or other factors that it could be. So they have this thing about blaming their shoes when maybe it's not always the running shoe.
It's the running shoes, Dennis. So another question that's come up is about orthotics. So it says for the guys that have orthotics, so how important is the prescription with regards to not compromising or inhibiting the technical attributes of the specific running shoe? And how do you then balance support and function of the orthotics with the actual characteristics of the running shoe?
Okay, the general trend is to use an orthotic in a neutral running shoe. And there's many, many neutral running shoes out there. If you use an orthotic with a very strong motion control anti-pronation shoe, I think the combination of orthotic and support is going to perhaps be too much support. So the general trend is to use it with a neutral shoe as a combination, but it's very important that you get the right mixture between the shoe and the orthotic. Otherwise, it can be detrimental.
I think that's also sorry, Belinda, I think that's also very patient biomechanics dependent, and how they wear out their orthotic as well.
So the same vein, and it goes more to the younger runners, so your school kids and things like that. You often prescribe orthotics in that case.
Yeah, to talk about orthotics is also, I think, a webinar on its own, the use of orthotics and how we make orthotics. And there's many other professions that also make orthotics and use orthotic type devices. But yeah, very controversial. The world trend is slightly, I think, away from orthotics, trying to use the shoe more to do what you want for the person in terms of cushioning or a little bit of motion control or stability. So it's a very controversial area that I'm, in a sense, slightly anti-orthotics because I find most runners struggle with orthotics. They can't get used to them, or they're just uncomfortable with them, and then they end up just hating them and not using them anyway. You know, so it's a little bit of a controversial one. I know Lauren makes a lot of the new type of computer-generated orthotic type devices, which, yeah, these are interesting, but just I think not everybody needs orthotics. I think one with the rehab and training of the feet and using the right shoe, they could be okay.
Absolutely, with the correct shoe prescription, like everything starts with the shoe. I always tell my runners who look at me with big eyes when I advise them on how much the shoe potentially could cost. I say to them, think about it. You have it better off than a cyclist. Cyclist has to invest in a bike and a helmet and shorts and shoes and all that. I said, you just have to invest in some shoes and some socks. That's it.
Okay, I think I'm going to jump in here and wrap up the evening. Thank you very much, Belinda and Lauren.
John, I just have one more question for Dennis.
Okay.
And that is, Dennis, which is the best running shoe?
You want me to start all over again with this hour and a half lecture of mine, eh?
Thank you very much, Dennis. I think you did answer a lot of people's questions. We had about 250 questions come through, so I'm sure it wasn't all because of the prize on offer, but a lot of it because of the interest that you stimulated. So thank you very much for that excellent discussion on a very, very complex topic. I think you covered them very nicely. So really, again, just to thank our sponsors, Asino and Lita Pharmaceutical Company, and this evening, ASICS, as Dennis has pointed out, generously sponsored 3 pairs of shoes, which he's shown you. And I'm going to read out the questions from the winners. And what I want these winners to do is to please email us at WiSH, and we will make sure that you receive your prizes. Just give us your full names and your details. So the first question, if you can answer briefly from the prize winning question, is how do you advise runners to buy shoes predominantly according to lower limb biomechanics, in other words, stability for pronators, etc., or do you base it largely on their injury patterns?
Well, I would say both. Both play a role in what shoe they need to get. So if they are injured and it's because of shoes or biomechanics, then obviously they need to be assessed so that we can get the slightly better biomechanical, if I can call it that, shoe for them. The other way is to put an orthotic in, but as Lauren says, it all starts with the shoe. So got to get the right shoe for them. Now, if they've been around running for many, many years, then they would probably have a good idea of what shoes, what genre of shoes is working for them. If they're a new runner, then it's a bit more of a challenge, because you don't really know even if the correct shoe will work for them, because there's always that exception to the rule. So it becomes a very difficult thing, but you work together with your specialist store and do a proper biomechanical examination and a gait examination, and then try to get the right shoe. And hopefully you get it right first time, as opposed to costing them a lot of money by going for other shoes again.
And that question came from our first winner, who's Jessica Lala. And Jessica, Robin's going to put up my email address. I'm going to ask him to put it up on the last slide. So you just email me and we'll arrange for you to have those shoes delivered to you according to your size, etc. So Jessica, congratulations. Our second winner, I'd like Lauren to answer this question. Lauren, how would you educate or advise sports patients and runners on which features to look at in order to know when they need to replace their current running shoes? I know Dennis covered some of this, but it's such an important question for our runners. When they come into you for that advice, what do you get them to look at?
I love this question because it's something I discuss with almost every single runner that I see. So a running shoe is really cool because it actually has tread markers on the bottom, just like your tire does on your car. When you get down to your tread marker, you know that your tread's down and you need to replace the tire. Running shoes, very similar. I always ask them, please turn the shoe over, have a look at the bottom sole of the shoe, the rubber outer sole, and look at the area that is most worn, not at the area that is least worn. You have to look at the area that is most worn and how much have you worn away? I generally say that I can generally find about 2 markers. So you're looking at the grooves within that tread pattern. You get a superficial groove and then a deep groove. If you're on your deep groove, which is the second marker, shoe's done. You're almost down to the EVA of the midsole, and that shoe's generally finished. I have a point of reference. Mileage, what Dennis spoke about earlier, mileage is so important, and mileage tracking on the shoe as well. Because you'll also notice that, and this is something I wish we had more time to expand on, but like the Adidas Boost, which is some interesting tech on it that tends to go a little bit further than most shoes. But generally, it is the tread markers on the bottom of the shoe in the area that is most worn. And when you're on your second mileage marker, which is the deepest groove, that's when you're looking for a new shoe.
Great. So that question came from Tanyani. Tanyani, if you will email me as well, you didn't give us all your details, but send us in on the email and we'll make sure you get your prize. Congratulations. And then the last one, really a question from one of our clinicians, which is very common as well. Lauren, perhaps you could tackle this one as well. Is it a question of a formula that fits your shoe prescription? In other words, the old-fashioned big, heavier runner needs a stability shoe, lighter runner gets the lighter shock-absorbing shoe, or is it more complex than that? What are the key issues clinicians should look out for when giving advice to runners when choosing their shoes?
So I'll run down what I do in my practice. A patient comes in, a good history is really important to understand of if do they have an injury or not? Are they looking for a shoe that they need something to start in? Or have they got an injury that you now need to treat with that was perhaps caused by a running shoe? A biomechanical assessment is critical here to actually look at what the lower limb biomechanics are doing and to really assess that correctly. How much pronation is happening? What biomechanics could have possibly contributed towards the injury? Then we take the weight into consideration and how fit is the patient. One example I like to give of a shoe that potentially can cause damage, and it's interesting because of the way that the shoe works, is the Adidas Boost. And it actually has a percentage of energy that's returned because of that boost pellet. If you've ever chewed on one of those, the Adidas reps love to give us a boost pellet to chew on it because you can never change its shape. And that requires quite a lot of eccentric strength. So if the patient is unfit and cannot control that eccentric energy, or that it doesn't have eccentric fitness, then that's detrimental and you can cause an injury there. So taking somebody who's quite heavy, who's going to put quite a lot of energy into that shoe, is going to get quite a lot back. And if they're not fit enough, they're going to land up with an injury. So it's definitely quite technical. It's also having a good knowledge of the shoes as well and what is out there. And then also allowing the patient to decide for themselves what is comfortable for them. Having a good shoe shop partner is quite important. They understand how to measure your foot correctly. If you do have an orthotic, how much space your orthotic needs, so that it's not necessarily the patient's judgment on the fit necessarily. They have had another set of eyes onto that. And then saying, okay, I think you need to be in a mild stability shoe. These are the suggestions that I'm putting forward. And then the patient can decide from there which is most comfortable. That's the general rule of thumb that I use in my practice when prescribing a running shoe. But most certainly, patients' weight, build, fitness level are quite important to take into consideration.
Brilliant. That came from Brandon Jackson in Durban. So Brandon, give us a shout with your details and we'll make sure you get your shoes as well. Thank you very much. Congratulations to those 3 winners. Thank you to ASICS again for that. We've taken a bit longer than usual, but a great topic that required that insight. For me, the take-home message is speak to the experts. Listen to your podiatrists, make friends with a podiatrist, ask them the right advice, get to a good shoe shop, and between the podiatrists and the shoe shops that know what they're talking about, you're going to get the best advice for what you need. And that ranges from your biomechanics right through to price. So I think that's very, very important take-home message for me today. I certainly learned a lot. So thank you very much to Dennis, to Belinda and Lauren for your great insight. Thanks for Robin for being in the background and helping us. Apologies for taking a bit long and for the load shedding, which created some havoc, I know. But thank you all for joining us on WiSH Wednesday, and we look forward to sharing the next one with you. And as you can see, we've got one coming up on dance and gymnastics rehab, which fits very nicely with the trend that we've been following on foot and ankle conditions. So thanks very much for supporting WiSH. Thank you to SASMA for your support, and again to our sponsors, Sina Lita, and tonight to ASICS. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.